everybody is divine, and there is a system that we live in that is oppressing everybody and limiting everybody's potential and everyone's capacity to understand themselves as a divine being. I envision a future in my wildest dreams where everyone understands, knows, and embodies themselves as being God, as being part of the body of God and understanding our divinity.
Welcome, welcome. This Monday, we begin our next learning journey from me to we. We have sliding scale pricing and scholarships so that nobody is turned away. In order to really live our we, everybody that is called to this work needs to be able to take part. We've also released tickets to just the speaker sessions in case you're feeling a bit zoomed out to take part in the whole thing at this time, but you really want to tune into one of the themes in particular, or you want to support this inquiry as it's so key to the world that we are currently living in. The themes of From Me to We are week 1, which starts this Monday, dismantling New Age spirituality. What is New Age spirituality and why does it need dismantling? How have our spiritual lives been co-opted by systems of power and separation, including capitalism, colonization, anthropocentrism, patriarchy, and hyper-individualism? We have Alnor Lada, Swati Martin, and Tiokasin Ghost Horse joining us this Monday. And I feel like this particular theme is such an important question for this time, and one that really just kept ringing in my ears over the past year. And I feel like part of the shift that we are trying to embody as we come into this part of the pandemic 2 years in and try and actually take some lessons and live in a different way, that this question is so key for anyone that is on a spiritual path. And so do come and join us for that. You can actually now attend just the evening if you can't make the whole course, but the whole course is full of many fruits. You can always catch up on things as you have time if you don't feel like you can commit to all the sessions as we go live. Week 2 is the expanded we, where we explore the questions, what happens when we move beyond polarity and anthropocentrism into a larger sense of we? And how do we embrace both the more than human world and those who have different beliefs to us in our understanding of who we are? And our speakers for this session are Charles Eisenstein, Jyoti Ma, and the Reverend Jen Bailey. The next theme, week 3, is We Are All Entangled, where we explore the questions, how can we shift our understanding of karma from an individual to a collective embodied inquiry and practice? How can karma actually invite more space for different belief systems and diversity on the path? The speakers for this session are Jeremy Lent, Sally Kempton, and Nazreen Sheikh. And then for week 4, the theme is Collective Dharma, where the questions that we're exploring are, how do we deepen our understanding of Dharma from an individual soul focus to a collective inquiry that honors and celebrates both our diversity and interconnectedness and calls for collective liberation and prosperity? How can we dismantle our privilege and notions of white saviorism while still showing up for issues such as climate breakdown, which have less impact where there is more wealth? Our speakers for this session are Claire Dubois, Uma Dinsmore-Tooley, and Erin Dixon. And then in week 5, we're exploring engaged activism, where our speakers are Brother Phap Lin, Samantha Roddick, and Ada Paris. And the questions are, how can we redefine sacred activism for this moment and embrace the political, ecological, and societal challenges within our understanding of and commitment to our spiritual practice? What does community organizing and activism look like when our sense of self is now so global and technological? For week 6, our theme is embodying all that we are. How do we embody a spirituality of wholeness and innate worth as we live in the complexity of now? What is all that we are? And our speakers for this session are Richard Rudd, Nina Simons, and Matt McCartney. The invitation of this journey is for all who identify as spiritual beings, as activists, parents, change makers, future ancestors, global citizens, the curious, active and inspiring, all of us who long to understand how best to serve during these rapidly changing times. It is for those who feel called to move from an individualized relationship with the sacred to a more collective, expansive, embodied and engaged experience with other kindred souls. We hope that each one of us joining this learning journey will be able to contribute to life and to your community in a deeper and more meaningful way. It is our deepest hope for this journey to be a collective inquiry with our existing and emerging community, including listeners of this podcast and the speakers, as we reimagine, expand and redefine the we in our new name, All That We Are. Whilst we recognise many of us may be a little tired of Zoom, we honour the gift that we can come together with ease from all around the globe and create an enlivening and energising gathering. We feel that the questions of this learning journey are timely and are emergent for this moment, and we are excited to hold space for this. We're offering a brave space of healing and transformation. We know that this can't be done alone, and that these sacred containers where we gather from all over the world to explore key themes of our time have powerful ripples into individual lives as well as our collective consciousness. As the pandemic has changed us in ways that we are just comprehending, several living questions are: how can we live our values in a more meaningful way? How do we move from the paradigm of individual spirituality to something that feels more aligned with the story of interbeing? How do we have a relationship with the sacred that allows us to show up in an engaged way, recognizing that we're all in the same storm but not in the same boat? We're living in a crisis of spirit and separation from our true nature, each other, and this beautiful planet. Navigating a spiritual path within late-stage capitalism is challenging for all of us, as many of us have moved away from organized religion into a hybrid of different cultures and practices. Whilst well-being has become an industry, we feel the damage that New Age spirituality has caused. It has distorted us from an engaged and embodied approach to collective healing and liberation, in many cases fostering greater separation, individualism, and escapism, and doing little to dismantle and transform the systems of power and separation that drive so much suffering in our world. Many of us feel that we've become a product of this time and these systems, with a focus on individual success and external comparison, fueling these very crises rather than seeking to heal their shared roots. Despite good intentions, we find ourselves navigating the complexities of these times rather clumsily and being part of the problem. We now also exist within cancel culture, where questioning the dominant narrative can lead to being outcast and deplatformed. It's a challenging time we live in. If you are feeling called to deepen your understanding of this time, unravel some outdated patterns, and explore how you can grow and serve in your community, All That We Are invites you to join us on this living inquiry into how we move from me to we. This is a collective journey to transmute and heal from the hyper-individualized and capitalist shadows that too often fuel isolation, inadequacy, and polarity. Our deepest intention is to create space to discover and embody a spirituality of belonging, wholeness, and action, to live a we that is both more inclusive and expansive in these divided times, and in deeper relation with the more than human world. And so if this touches some of the questions that you have, the edges that you might be meeting in your own path as a sacred activist, then we would love for you to join us. The embodiment facilitator for this journey is Ava Riby-Williams, our guest today. Ava is a queer, British Ghanaian Indian visionary. Living in London, she acts out life purpose as a creative facilitator, yoga teacher, activist, and artist who encourages play and promotes diversity in all of life. Her work focuses on finding presence and feeling in the moment, while guiding groups into deeper contemplation of issues concerning their liberation and well-being on personal and collective levels. As a guide, Ava is clear that the point of her work is to encourage her students to become their own inner teachers, recognizing ourselves as divinity in unity. Ava is driven by the importance of making healing possible for marginalized communities as a tool to unwind trauma, whilst learning about the cycles which oppress them in order to share teachings on equity with others. She has been creating and facilitating trainings in this field with communities and also activists and healers that support them since 2017. She is passionate about creating brave, accessible spaces for self-exploration, movement, expression, and acceptance, and is deeply curious about how we can do this across lines of oppression. For 2022, Ava is developing a new series of somatic movement workshops, which she'll be sharing with groups in London. With over 10 years of yoga, creative practice, facilitation, and performance experience, her teaching is often woven with song, poetry, and play as a way to deepen our capacity to love and experience life. In this conversation, entitled Moving into Collective Divinity, we explore the themes of embodiment, trauma, and grief, where we speak to the question, how can we experience our bodies as diverse resources for liberation? I hope that you enjoy this conversation and that it invites you into deeper relationship with your body and with this world. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration. The spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. Ava, I am delighted to welcome you to All That We Are. Thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom and your joy with us today.
Thanks, Amisha. Thank you so much for having me.
My first question is a question that we're asking everyone in these episodes. We've changed the wording slightly because as we went on this journey of trying to find a new name, we realized that the future is a kind of plural, multidimensional, not the same experience. And so our question is, what are the futures of your wildest dreams?
I feel like I could go in so many different directions with that. But I think the simplest way for me to answer it would be, I envision a future of my wildest dreams where everyone understands, knows, and embodies themselves as being God, as being part of the body of God and understanding our divinity. I feel like a lot of the suffering that we experience and see in the world around us and even within ourselves comes from a sense of powerlessness or lack of agency and a disconnection between us, that if we really understood that there is no way that we could be separated from life force in a way. There is no way that we could be outside of the cycle of eternity. There is no way that we could actually be truly disconnected from one another and every single other living being on the planet. Then if we lived in that truth, and it was an embodied experience, I think people would hopefully show up with more sensitivity, myself included, and a greater sense of empowerment, which would hopefully create some beautiful change.
What do you think blocks us from being able to do that?
So many things. The system that we live in, white, capitalist, hetero, patriarchy, colonialism, all of these systems are built to profit off us not being empowered and not seeing ourselves as connected to one another and seeing ourselves as needy of something that we don't have. And therefore, as long as we're needing something else outside of ourselves, then it's easier for other powers to control us. It's intentional that people don't know their power. It's an intentional secret of the systems that we live in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it requires us to, like you say, not be as sensitive as we actually are and as actually serves us in order to survive within these systems.
Yeah. Numbness it's a coping mechanism, but it's actually kind of, yeah, as you said, it's kind of the intention that we are numb from each other's suffering, numb from each other's pain, because to be open to it all, as some people experience, as I definitely feel like, especially right now in my life, I'm really experiencing a drastically increased level of sensitivity and empathy to trauma, to people's pain. It feels so much easier, so tempting to just want to just look away, just not be present to it, because it can be so overwhelming to actually experience and be open to the pain and the suffering that there is. But as Brené Brown says, you can't selectively numb. So if we're numb to the pain and the suffering that we're going through, but also other people, other beings are going through, then we'll also be numb to the heights of joy, the heights of ecstasy, the erotic, as Audre Lorde speaks about, the erotic as power. We'll be numb to all of that if we're not open to actually feeling our pain and feeling our suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. I always really feel that in my own journey, I've had to go into so much of the depth of my pain, my trauma, and the pain and the trauma of my ancestral story and my migrant situation, and all of these different aspects of life, experiencing lots of accidents and near-death experiences, experiencing lots of death. And I do believe that because of being willing to go there, and it's not been pretty to observe, and it's definitely, I've burnt bridges through it, I've lost opportunities, all kinds of things, because I've had to really go and feel. I also have this incredible capacity for joy and pleasure. I find it so interesting because there are so many statistics about, say, people that can't orgasm. And it's like, that must be so connected to this systemic numbing of pain and therefore its impact on pleasure.
Yeah, I feel that there might be some connection there, as you say. It kind of makes sense to me. I also understand why it does feel easier for people to, even me sometimes, definitely, like it feels easier to be numb sometimes rather than to be fully open. I've been looking into different attachment styles recently. It's just part of my own personal and like also relationship development. And I definitely have a dismissive / avoidant attachment style I'm learning, which means that I've learned to distance myself from emotional situations, because at times when I've really felt like I've needed to show up with my full emotions, there hasn't really been space for it historically in my life. And so I've kind of learned to distance myself from it. Oh, especially this year so far has been a real, very deep awakening to further sensitivity and realizing that this is a thing that I do, that sometimes I do distance myself from my emotional truth. Even though I'm aware of it, it still happens sometimes. And I try to keep turning towards like staying with what I'm feeling and especially at the minute.
Yeah, I feel like we can all relate to that. You mentioned this year especially and what you're going through. And I know that you and your family have suffered a great personal tragedy and a great loss that you're having to grieve and assimilate and find a way to live with. Would you like to share a bit about what you've been going through?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Yeah, so in January, trigger warning, but my brother, my older brother, was killed. And it was a really shocking and just, hugely traumatic event. which has just sent ripples through every single part of my life. I've gone through so many different emotions, and you know, at one stage I was feeling completely fearless. I was like, the most terrifying thing that I can imagine has just happened to me and my family. What do I have to be afraid of? You know, and I was kind of just diving into everything that I was doing with this kind of like invincible feeling of like, if I can breathe and stand right now with this, then anything is possible. And then that kind of faded. And then I also experienced the complete opposite of feeling like, oh my God, I'm so sensitive. If I go out right now and someone like bumps me on the street, I will not be able to take that. Literally. So, and really understanding, I'm going to paraphrase him right now because I don't have the quote in front of me, but Resmaa Menakem says this thing about how trauma decontextualized turns into personality and even into culture in whole communities of people. And that's how it presents when trauma is decontextualized. And I've really had this, I already knew that, and it already was embodied experience for me very deeply before this year. But especially now, I just feel so deeply how that is true, how our trauma can turn into personality. I can imagine myself at moments shrinking into the kind of person who actually is too sensitive to go outside or is too sensitive to, you know, engage in conversation or these things. I can feel the kind of the shivers of those things within me. And I feel like if I wasn't so blessed to have such a deep inquiry and spiritual practice, space for reflection in my life, if I wasn't so resourced as I am, and I'm so grateful for it, I can so see how that would happen. And it just, how experiences of trauma can so literally knock the air out of you. And it's a physical experience. It's like, it just completely like, can I even stand? It's just such a deeply embodied experience. It's profound. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It's firstly, I'm so sorry for what you've had to experience. And I don't know more about the actual context of what happened to your brother, but we've all been on a kind of cultural journey of Black Lives Matters and kind of understanding that the path of Black men is not the same as the other men in this world. And often it's felt like, oh, but in the UK, it's not as bad as it is in like the US. And obviously it's different. The systems operate slightly differently, but it is there. It's a real thing that's happening in this world. And it's something that you've had to experience.
Yeah, I mean, couple of things. The brother who passed away, so my family is split between, so South Asian, my mom is Gujarati, and then my dad's side of the family is Ghanaian. So my brother who died was fully Gujarati, and also still was like hugely experienced a lot of the things that you're alluding to in his life, and trauma due to culture, due to race, which really did impact his life and was really hard for all of us. I mean, just because I do feel like it really serves what we're talking about, I am going to go into a bit more detail. He was basically killed in an incident of gang violence, and there was a group of people who killed him. It's just been such a profound experience to actually see these people, to go to court and actually witness these people. You know, the spiritual practice and understanding of life that I have is a non-dual understanding of life. It is my experience that even though everything looks separate, even though we do live in duality, actually everything is connected and everything is part of the same thing. And that is the body of God. That is consciousness, that is energy, awareness. And it's basically everything is energy and awareness just masquerading in a different face, looking out from itself into itself. And to hold that understanding that's been an embodied understanding for me for quite a few years now, at least 4 or 5 years, that I've kind of been practicing it in that kind of lineage, to hold that understanding and then to go and see these people who have like so personally created catastrophe in my life. It's been a real challenge, trial, and yet still confirmation that, okay, we live in a situation where most people are not experiencing life as them being the body of God, them being divine, but it still doesn't make it not true for me. And actually, how can I, even in this situation, without needing to brush past what's happened, how can I actually grant these people their humanity and still know that whatever situation it was that caused them to, commit these crimes, that actually they are still human, they are still divine beings, even though that's not how they're experiencing life. But also, there is something about this which is like, this was created by the system. The fact that there was no better option that these people could consider for their lives in that moment, that actually the systems of oppression that I've mentioned already, white capitalist, hetero patriarchy, white supremacy, like that they've created this system where actually some people have so few legal options to actually get their needs met that it just causes this perpetuating cycle of pain. Yeah, it's been really interesting to actually live the principles of my spiritual practice and live the principles of my activism work in this like very deeply personal situation, and to see that actually this isn't something that I'm just saying. This is not something like that I just want to be talking about in courses or on Instagram or anything like this, even though I do those things and that is part of my work, or even I don't even want to use that word work. It's like life purpose. It's deeply what I feel like I need to be doing in this lifetime. But it's not just for those arenas. Like even in this personal situation, this is my understanding of life. Everybody is divine, and there is a system that we live in that is oppressing everybody and limiting everybody's potential and everyone's capacity to understand themselves as a divine being. That is our main issue. Underneath everything else that happens, underneath all of the trauma that we're going through, yeah, that's what I'm understanding from the situation, basically.
Absolutely. It's like they are enacting an aspect, or they're embodying actually an aspect of this system in which we live, of these systems of oppression. And it feels like the inner systemic change work is really to rediscover ourselves as divine beings, to embody that aspect of ourselves in our lives. And it's not an easy endeavor up against all of these systems of oppression that we find ourselves in. And in systems that really are designed to make us feel less than, to make us feel really stressed, to make us feel really busy, to make us feel like, we're never going to get anywhere we're trying to get to, is exhausting to live in these systems. And, my family is Gujarati as well. And we have gone through a lot of racism in this country in so many different ways, at so many different times in our lives. And it's there and it's clear. And anybody that is not fitting into that kind of template, basically white heterosexual male with wealth, experiences so much. And then, of course, even those in bodies that do tick all of those boxes still experience all of this because it's there. It's causing so much separation. It stops us from being able to be like who we really are and to live the purpose that we really came here for. And it feels sometimes like just an insane waste of our lives that we kind of have to fill our time doing all these things that really don't connect to that aliveness of our soul. And yet that is the world that we live in. Courses and Instagram and all of these sharings, you know, sometimes it can feel like, well, what is the purpose of that? And it's like, well, the purpose is that it reconnects us. These are the tools that we have at this time to be able to reconnect in that way. I love what you're sharing about this real understanding of an embodied spiritual practice that really is what you lean into, what you are in your life, no matter what's happening. And I would love if you could share a little bit more about that, you know, because it's so easy. Yeah, I mean, I feel like tragedy always kind of brings us into such spiritual clarity. But the place where I feel like so many of us flail is just in the busyness of the everyday. I don't feel it's all about necessarily doing certain practices. It is about practices for sure, but it's also just about having a particular embodied understanding of life. And I wonder if you can share a bit more about what that means to you.
Oh my God, yeah, I've got so much to say about that. I'm thinking about where to actually start. First of all, with the busyness. Oh, the busyness. Oh my God, the busyness. Like, I mean, as you said, it's just this exhausting, almost like, almost just a job to prove or reassure people that you're busy. You're like, oh God, I've just been so busy. You know, people talk, I'm so busy right now, or I've been doing so much, or I'll speak from personal experience. Like, that's what in my family is always like that. It's like, I haven't even sat down today. Like, I'm just doing so much. And that kind of being something to almost pride ourselves on and say, oh, how's work? Busy, busy? Yeah, good, good, good. It's like that whole culture of let's just do more and more and more so that we feel worthy of our lives, that we've quote unquote earned our lives.
Or sometimes just trying to earn a living requires standing up all day. And there may be no glorification of that, but just not really an understanding of how it can happen any other way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, definitely for my family, that's definitely where it's come from. And then it's kind of like this survival mode, which even though my family nowadays is like pretty comfortably middle class, like they came from this intense survival mode that once it wasn't really necessary anymore, I don't feel like it ever got switched off. It just became this kind of like, mode of living. But then just to jump a little bit back to what you were saying about, you know, embodying spiritual practice. Yeah, having our lives be, you know, really where we implement the spiritual practice. On the online learning journey that we're going to be doing, All That We Are, I think it is the first week that we talk about dismantling New Age spirituality. And I feel like that kind of speaks to it a little bit for me of embodying and actually practicing what we are teaching, learning in the spiritual spaces. I was having this conversation with my partner just yesterday. She's like my favorite place to bounce ideas and kind of learn from, because she's just completely just embodied wisdom. And we were speaking about how, you know, nowadays it is the way that we roll, in a way that you can just go and pick spiritual practices from any place on the planet. You can start using them, you know, and it's not so much that, you know, in the past, you'd be initiated into one lineage and then you might spend your whole life just chanting one mantra and going very deep into this very particular part of a certain lineage. And nowadays you can kind of choose from this plethora of anything that's been taught around the globe and anything that you can find online and pick it up and use it as part of your practice. And I'm not necessarily saying that has to be a negative thing, even though I do feel like it's been co-opted by capitalism massively. The difference is like actually taking different practices and how can we actually take these things off the mat and bring the practice into our lives? Because I think sometimes when we just pick things and scratch the surface of a particular practice and take only the things that really suit us, because as consumers, again, in the capitalist society, we've kind of learned that, well, if I'm spending the money, then I get to choose which bit I want. I get to kind of cherry pick and kind of, pick the thing from the shop that I like, essentially, rather than take the whole thing. But how do we actually start living these things and allow them to sink in deep enough that we start actually acting in this way in our lives, rather than only giving it a tiny bit of our attention span, as long as it takes to kind of like flick through a different post or something like that, so that it's kind of only just goes into a particular part of our brain and doesn't necessarily move into the way that we're living. I mean, it's kind of a joke that I have. Like, I love festival culture. You know, I love, probably of like almost 15 years, I've loved going to like UK music festivals and arts festivals and stuff over the summer. There seems to be this thing that everyone shows up with a certain aspect of themselves to festivals, right? And it's like, well, I'm going to be my free loving self in this time. And it's so beautiful. And I definitely am, you know, have definitely been that in so many situations. And then it's like, I wonder how much of that energy actually gets moved into our lives when we come home. The energy of, oh, we're all connected and people are often like really generous and kind of understanding connectivity when we're in situations like that, or when we're in a particular community or at an event or something like this. And then how much of it actually do we live into when we go home? And it's not like a pointing the finger thing. It's me as well. I really probe myself and try and make sure that I am actually living the things that I'm saying, because it's so much easier to just say things rather than to actually live it in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, totally. I'm about to move into a community house as a way of actually stepping deeper into living the things that I talk about, and realizing that living in a flat, it kind of creates a more insular framework, and it also makes, you know, me less open. And yeah, I'm intrigued as to what's about to happen, being in that kind of space where we're going to annoy each other, like people are going to do things that are going to be like, you know, it's not I'm going to want to record a podcast and someone else going to want to dance at the same time, and we're going to kind of like come into all these different things, but actually it's a real opportunity to grow. I really do feel that so much of our healing happens in that context of community, trying to invite that into my life in lots of different ways and lots of different spaces. Is something that I really want to be part of. I want to share meals. I don't want to use less packaging and all of these kinds of things that modern life kind of takes us in this like direction. And our values are like, no, but I'm over here. Like it's a completely different side of it. And I notice like when I'm living on my own in London, I end up like spending a lot of money on food deliveries and things like that. Like it doesn't bring out that side of me that, you know, makes a good Gujarati dal for everyone to share.
Oh, that sounds good. Gujarati dal, definitely. Wow, good luck with that experience. I've gone in the opposite direction. I house shared like all the way from even before uni, like from college, I was house sharing and then always did, and then lived with my partner. And over the last year, this is my first time in actually living by myself. That's also been a hugely powerful experience for me. And this is kind of goes back to what I was saying about, you know, that non-dual perspective and not seeing one thing as good thing, one thing as bad thing. It's just like, what is it for who and when? What is the scenario? Like there's no fixed wrong or right. It's just what a person needs at the time and what's going to kind of create more life and truth in that moment.
Yeah, it's inviting in the Leela, the play of life, and us being able to listen and say, okay, yeah, I've done this now for a while, and this has, you know, opened up these growth opportunities, and it's allowed me to learn this and to assimilate this, and now it's time for this, and kind of, yeah, just being able to really trust our intuition and move with the adaptation of our own soul journey as well as the world, and how that's moving and kind of creating this dynamic relationship where our spiritual path is key, and that ability to really listen to our own wisdom, listen to our own nudges.
Yeah, 100%. And knowing that in any part of that journey that you just described and any situation that we find ourselves in could be a situation where we come into very deep, close connection with God, with divinity, because that power is absolutely everywhere and anywhere. We can feel and really be wherever we are and still have that experience.
We are taking just a short pause here. If you are enjoying this episode, please consider joining our community. For a small contribution, you can be part of our beautiful online world where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and practice. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, and you receive a number of benefits, such as special member-only events and discounts on all our courses, retreats, and in-person experiences. You will have membership to our app and connect with inspiring humans around the world through a social network to discuss the themes of the show away from the eyes of advertisers and the manipulation of big tech. Our membership is what makes us able to stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. And it is the very heart of all that we are. Head to www.allthatweare.org/support to find out more. So we mentioned a little bit about From Me to We, the learning journey that we're going to be going on together. And when I sort of came up with this, it came first, I just heard the words dismantling New Age spirituality. And I was reflecting myself on how my own relationship to the divine and to my empowerment and to my ability to offer from my soul had been kind of co-opted and manipulated and taken it down some strange rabbit holes by New Age spirituality, because it's there, like the capitalization of our spiritual lives is such a thing that's been so present in recent years, but 20 years or so. So for people our age, it's really like been the spiritual world that we came into as we maybe have moved away from, like in my case, religious like ancestry, like very deeply religious ancestry, and then looking for that spark of connection, but with more freedom and liberation, but then that kind of becoming capitalist notion. And I feel like there are certain ideas that I picked up along the way that various teachers kind of kept repeating, and that actually some of them were really quite dangerous for me, and they kind of took me into these places where it actually made me much less than rather than more empowered. And that's really where that inspiration came for, like, why is it important that we talk about this, that we explore this now? Because I feel like if that was something that was happening in my own spiritual journey, then that was happening in many people's spiritual journeys. And I feel like a lot of it is really like spiritual journeys without the context of systems of oppression. When you get told, well, like if something is experiencing you, like what part of you is inviting that experience? What part of you what is it that you need to heal in yourself that's being reflected in other people? And I don't feel like that works for racism. I tried to make it work for racism, like so much. And I was like, okay, what am I doing that triggers people and causes them to act in a certain way towards me? And I spent so much of my life, like kind of sincerely trying to understand as part of my spiritual journey. And it's like, yeah, it's just the brown skin that's doing that. It's not like something deeply wrong with my personality that is inviting people to treat me that way. And yet what I was getting from everything that I was reading and the spiritual teachers that I was sitting with was, if you're repeatedly experiencing a certain kind of behavior, like it must be you creating it. And so that's just one example of something where I was like, it really was like a damaging thing to go through that. And of course, all of those spiritual teachers that I was reading and sitting with were white people that were not having that experience, that didn't know that people would just look at you differently. They will be grumpier with you. They might not like hold a door open for you. They might accuse you of something out of the blue. Like things just happen. And actually for me, the spiritual journey with racism is not what can I change inside me to stop it from happening to me. It's how can I not take it personally and allow for it to happen and keep rooting into the truth of who I am, even when I'm experiencing that distortion that's really like coming very much towards me. And of course, a lot of it isn't like somebody just shouting like pack go home in the street, although it used to be, it's evolved since then. But a lot of it's like more tricky, and it's just people like sort of behaving quite strangely, and you're like, oh, what is that? Like, why did that just happen? And then actually kind of, from having spaces where I've been able to understand racism and the way that it operates and talk to other people of color, I've kind of realized like, oh, okay, you experience that too. Okay, so that's what that is. And then it allows my spiritual experience to be different. And really that's just one example, but I feel like that New Age spirituality kind of simplifies things into this kind of like toolbox where it's like, well, it's your power to like manifest everything. And then if you can't, you're like, but why can't I? Like, what's wrong with me? Why have I not been able to create this dream life, like out of and then it creates a kind of unrealistic expectation of what a life might be, which then stops us actually from being able to really be present to the life that we have. And these are a few things. You might have some others. I'm just trying to fill in some that I feel are relatable. But for me, that's kind of where the beginning of this sort of from me to we journey came from. And then as I was working with Heli Cameron and Azadeh Mumungali-Buff on like the curation, it evolved into this like much deeper journey of like actually what is a collective healing journey. And I knew within that embodiment had to be a key part of it, that it's not just about talks and words. And for me, talks and words are an energetic experience. They're not, it's really, I open a field of embodiment within the field of talking so that it doesn't go head to head, but it's like a body to body kind of communication. And then, actually coming into practice and getting an opportunity to move our bodies whilst digesting some of these themes, opening space for that cellular energy to shift, for trauma to release, for all of this to happen. And at first, I was going to do the embodiment sessions, facilitate them, and Heli was going to do some with me. And then Ozzy and I were like, Ava, because we had this beautiful experience of being with you on this conscious activism program that was held with the Empowerment Project, and to experience you as a facilitator. And I really felt like, like these themes, like you get these, and I would love to come on a journey with you as we embody each of these themes. And really a big part of my intention with all that we are is inviting people in, inviting like facilitators in and community in, and making these like shared experiences. And so firstly, I want to say thank you for saying yes. And I would love it if you could share with us a bit more about like what embodiment means to you, and also like what you're excited about in this particular learning journey and what people might be able to expect.
Yeah, oh, definitely. First of all, little shout out to the Empowerment Project and the Conscious Activism course, which is happening again this year. So I'm excited about that. Thanks for mentioning that. And yeah, in terms of what embodiment means to me and my facilitation on all that we are, for me, embodiment is about being present to actually feel how these things that we're talking about, as you said, are actually landing in our physical body, and to find some way of processing what we're understanding in our minds and moving it towards what we were talking about actually living out our values, living out our spiritual practice. So I teach yoga asana. The sessions that we're going to be doing, I'm not calling them yoga sessions. We're not really going to be moving strictly through yoga asana, even though what we're going to be doing is definitely informed by my 6 or 7 years of yoga teaching and just my practice in general and spirituality. I often say in when I'm teaching yoga asana classes that, the mat, your yoga mat is like a microcosm of your life. And the movements that you make, or even the commitment that you make to move in a way that feels empowering, that feels freeing in some way, it's like a little kind of test tube or petri dish experiment as to how how you might be able to do that in your own body that's not necessarily, a copy and paste of whatever the teacher is demonstrating. It's like, well, how can you practice actually showing up for yourself in a way that feels true to you and making decisions that feel important to you in this moment with your body as a way to kind of practice doing it in the rest of your life. And I guess, so that's what we're going to be doing a little bit in these embodiment sessions, is practicing responding to these themes, which are so rich. Like I'm not going to list them all off now, but if you're listening and you haven't had a look at the themes that we're going to be covering over these 6 weeks, really do take a look, because they're really rich, and there's going to be loads of conversation happening around them each week as well. My space in the community is that I hope to provide a kind of experiment, if you like, for how might I actually act out and embody living with these themes, experimenting with these themes, first in the microcosm of my living room or my yoga mat, if when we use yoga mats or whatever it might be. And then it's like almost just tasting that muscle memory of, okay, well, what would it be like to take this essence then out into more of my life, basically. And we're going to be hopefully playing quite a bit, playing with free movement, playing with movement guided in a kind of loose way from me, and then also interacting with other people in the group. And I feel like that's the whole point of the journey, in the way that I see it, is collective experience, all that we are. It's like, how do we understand our unity, but also uniqueness and diversity within that, and how do we celebrate all of that? So I'm really hoping to play with getting people to relate in the space with one another, move with one another, be inspired by each other's movements. I read Emergent Strategy, I think it was like last year now, by Adrienne Maree Brown. She talks about starlings quite a bit, and biomimicry, which is basically, I feel like this is a bit of a tangent, but I'm doing it. She talks about biomimicry, which is where humans basically learn from other kinds of life, so plant life or animal life, and use qualities that we see in the natural world to inspire our own development and evolution. And in talking about biomimicry, in terms of starlings, Adrienne Maree Brown talks about how they move together in a kind of collective mind, so that each starling only needs to focus on, I think, like the 4 or 5 birds around it. But when is deeply tuned to those birds that are just surrounding it, the whole group can move as these kind of constellations and patterns all together in such a unified way. And I like to play with imagery and kind of ideas from the animal world like this, to think, well, how would I actually move if I was appreciating and kind of feeding off what I'm getting from you in your movement in this moment? And how can we do that in a way where I can still honor all of the uniqueness and abilities of my own body whilst I'm doing that? And how do we make collective decisions in movement without speaking? How do we have our own individual moments to just move however we want to, and then come back to that collective experience and honor our unity, but also our individuality at the same time? Like, I'm very much collective, community minded, and I always have been very Aquarius, I guess. But I'm also incredibly rebellious and enjoy my own individuality and understand that I don't need to be the same as anyone else to be deeply connected to a collective identity.
I love that you mentioned starlings. When I was choosing images for the page about From Me to We, I instinctively just put a starling image on there.
Yeah, I saw.
Feeling into the memorations. For me, that's the power of doing these programs coming together, and actually, like, it does help us to fly together And it really ripples out into consciousness when we show up to do this kind of work. I think it can be so easy to feel like we're not important enough or like it doesn't matter. But I really feel like my whole invitation with All That We Are, like right from when I started this in 2010, has been around that empowerment of us understanding that each one of us is creating the future of this world by how we spend our time, our money, our energy, and by our consciousness. And so every single one of us that can show up to do this work, many of us that are here are in a privileged position. We have disposable incomes. We have time, even though we're busy, we're busy, but we have busy bees, but we have time. Our lives are very privileged compared to other lives in this world. Those of us that do have these opportunities, it's like this is part of the way that we can show up for this world, to do this work around shifting consciousness. And in a way, the themes are from me to we. They're a bit heavy, like they're not the kind of like, the invitation isn't like just, come and experience glorious sunshine. It's like, yeah, come and understand like why we feel this like innate isolation instead of this community. And I love what you share, because I feel like in a real community, it's a space where we can all be who we are. Like there is that, we don't all have to be the same. We can have our diversity, and we have such different souls, and we're such different expressions of what it is to be a human, each one of us. And I feel that being empowered in that, in sharing our gifts and sharing our purpose, but in a kind of collective kind of symbiosis, how we both being our true selves and contributing to the collective healing.
100%. And even, getting to the bottom of like, what is my true self? What is my true self versus what is the personality that I've constructed in order to feel worthy? What are the bits that I've kind of collaged together to create myself from, compliments that I've received about a certain way that I am, or ways that I've been accepted. So I'm just going to put all of this together and that's my personality. It's like, well, actually, even getting underneath that of like, what is my deep truth? Where is my true self? And how can I show up as that person outside of any of the masks? You mentioned something about showing up for healing in the collective. And I feel like one of the most powerful ways that we can do that is by delving into our own healing in terms of, well, what incarnation have I been brought into this life with? And there is some reason for that as well, that I was born into this body with these particular traumas. It's like, well, consciousness wanted to kind of explore what would happen in this incarnation, basically, in a way. What can I actually do with that? How can I bring truth to that and bring revolution to that from the traumas that I've experienced in my life and out of those traumas? And how can I orient to love and spirit even more deeply from that place? And so starting with the self, I feel like hopefully we'll get a chance to do both, starting with the self and kind of moving out into the collective. But in terms of like creating change that we want to see, quote unquote, out in the world, I do believe that it has to be a personal experience as well. And I feel like that's different. I feel like I really need to caveat by saying that it's different from being like, well, I just need to focus on my own healing and that's all that I need to do. Like in terms of being in service to life, I do feel like it is important to be attuned to the healing of the collective and the stories and the journey that we are going on as a collective. But at the same time, remember to still come at it from a personal lens. And I think sometimes it can be convenient to situate the healing that needs to be done outside of our own physical bodies and outside of our personal experience, and coming back to, well, actually, what is my personal contribution to the pain that I see out in the world, or what is it that I need to heal? Because at the end of the day, you know, it's my experience of life that consciousness is our constant audience. Even from inside of our bodies, consciousness is our constant audience. And we are being an audience to it through our beings as well. So in any moment, any way that we orient further towards love, orient further towards that, towards consciousness, it's like, even if no one is around, even if, you know, it's like, oh, it's not some massive thing that hundreds and hundreds of people are watching or quote unquote benefiting from. It's like, well, actually, it's still an action that's being experienced and observed constantly by consciousness. And that goes back to the thing that you said about, you know, every single person on this planet is an important part of our collective healing. Basically, how big or small, however you want to quantify that, is not necessarily the way that our society would have it seem, as like, oh, well, this person's got this many people following them or coming to these events or whatever it is. It's like everyone really does, even if no one is watching or creating a big audience for them, everyone really does have a huge impact to make, I think.
I want to ask you about grief, as grief is such a tender emotion. It's not something that we're culturally taught to do very well, especially in Western cultures. It can be something that's like, you know, a couple of days of crying, and then it's like the person that's died is sort of swept under the carpet, if you like, and you don't speak of that person very much again, and you're kind of just meant to get back on with your lives. And that's changing. There is like more of a willingness to understand death and understand how experiencing death affects us, and understanding kind of like the trauma dynamics that play in grief. And I wonder what you can share, both from your personal experience and your training as somebody that works with trauma, how we can understand grief in a different way, and how we can, how we can work with it, dance with it in more healing ways. And of course, there's the grief of loved ones dying. There's the grief that we experience of our world changing, the grief that we experience around climate, all that's lost through these systems of oppression. There's the grief that we experience around our own dreams that aren't going to happen for whatever reason. There's so much grief that we experience. And I feel that no matter what your personal experience has been of the last couple of years of this pandemic, we've all had to come into contact with grief. Like, we've all had to come into contact with things not happening the way that we imagined that they might, and having to let certain things go. I'm in a grieving experience with a family member with a degenerative disease, and kind of watching that unfold. There's so many ways that we grieve. It's part of our daily life, that grieving that happens. Yeah, I would love to hear how you hold that.
Yeah. I try to hold it with a certain amount of grace, but it has taken me to so many different places. Riding the wave seems to be kind of the first phrase that's coming to mind. Yeah, honoring anyone listening to this who has ever found their breath to be all of a sudden just taken away by remembering something, or hearing a song, or yeah, even just a particular smell of, you know, some kind of like an aftershave or something, you know, something that has kind of taken my breath away over the last few months. Or honoring how in any different moment, such an unimaginably large emotion can flood our system. And another thing which I really, I'm giggling because the wildness of it is just unbelievable. And how this non-dual perspective, it really is, it really is filtering into so much into all of my life right now, more than ever. And just even I've just got back from a holiday, and I've been having a really beautiful time, and also literally feeling completely heartbroken at the same time. It's like both things can exist at the same time. I've had moments of deep, deep heartbreak, sadness, humor in the same moment, delight at actually feeling so much. Even in this heartbreak, it's like, what a blessing that I can actually feel. Because if I can actually feel, I can in some way experience connectedness more fully. And that's not to say that it's easy at all, but just deep gratitude for the awakening and the eye-opening experience that has happened, even though it's like completely shattering. But what a blessing that I'm not numb. What a blessing that I can actually feel this. And yeah, what a marvel. Like, how unbelievable is it that I can feel so deeply saddened? I can feel rage, or I can feel aroused, I can feel turned on, I can feel like funny or whatever. Like, all of these things can actually exist in the same breath. It's really unimaginable and also beautiful in a crazy and a little bit dark way. I guess, I mean, at times I really have just been like, right, I want to look away in this moment. I just want to drink. I just want to sleep, whatever. I just want to not feel this for this short amount of time. And I'm not going to demonize that at all. But in general, I've been trying to refocus myself to, where possible, not looking away. Where possible, can I lean into this? Like, why am I experiencing these deep stomach cramps? Can I just go into that and what is the feeling underneath that? Like, how can I breathe with that as much as possible? And then when I really feel like I need to look away, okay, I'll do it for some time, and then let me come back. Let me not continually abandon myself from this feeling, because it's real, actually. And if it's real and it's a part of me, then ultimately I'd rather feel it now than have it manifest in further dis-ease and disease in my body, which that is the progression that I understand of like things that we experience in our emotional and energetic body. If they don't get processed, it's a teaching of yoga that is when they start moving into more permanent, gross states of disease in our bodies. I do feel like that is what happens. We even see that in our communities, in deeply traumatized communities, in Black communities and communities of people of color. Like, there are illnesses and like ailments which do affect our communities more deeply. And I do feel like that is often a kind of a passing down of generational trauma. They didn't feel like there was time to process. I do feel like it kind of manifests in physical ways in the body when we're not able to have a catharsis with these things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like a combination of what's been passed down ancestrally. When we had Adrienne Maree Brown on the show a few weeks ago, she said something along the lines of, sometimes I might just need to rest for my grandmother that didn't get to in that moment. Or kind of an analogy of like, you might have a pain in your knee and it might come from somewhere where it didn't have that space to heal, and there's that invitation to heal. But really that reminder, of disease, and that it comes from trauma. And life is not easy. It's a dance of all kinds of emotions every single day. Every day we go through so much as human beings, and the ways that we learn, the tools that we have, the ways of being that we can tap into to process it dynamically in real time, it can really save us from some of these diseases that could happen. And it's also really not to shame diseases, because that also happens a lot. And I feel like that's part of the new age story that we were talking about as well. Like, how did you create this illness for yourself? And again, sometimes it's just because you live next to a river that companies are dumping toxic chemicals and you did not create that cancer through your own trauma. But sometimes by not stepping into ways where we really like can look after ourselves and honor ourselves and move energy, just like move and connect to the earth and, you know, be outside and just simply allowing ourselves to feel. I love what you shared about being able to kind of feel things that are kind of opposite at the exact same time. And I feel like that's how I have lived like a lot of my life, especially the last 2 years. And it's really that analogy of the heart breaking open. It's like there's so much pain and then it's like bursting through. It's like this other energy is there and I'm feeling them both like fully at the same time. And it's like, wow, like what immense beings we are.
Yes.
that we can feel these things. And I also really agree that allowing ourselves to have breaks from really deep healing processes, you know, and not to demonize like watching a movie or having a lie-in or having a few drinks, but, you know, also just being aware of when that few drinks turns into like every day and just noticing when like we kind of find ourselves in those spirals and just kind of having good tools to kind of pull ourselves out of those spirals or to let them play out. But I feel like there's a kind of awareness that you can hold with it. Like there's something that I started doing in January that I knew wasn't in alignment with my beliefs. I also knew that it was a coping mechanism for some particular things that I was dealing with. And I was like, that's okay, because I can feel that this is helping. It's just like allowing like a little bit of steam to come out of the pressure cooker. And, you know, when that bit of steam has moved through, then that thing won't have its place anymore. And last night I messaged one of my dear sisters and I was like, it's done, that cycle's complete. Like, and it wasn't like a beating myself up. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? You shouldn't be doing this. You know better than this. I just was like, okay, I can feel what this is helping me with. And I can feel that I need that like extra bit of support with that at this moment. And then I could feel when it was done. And it was like, okay, great. I can put that down. And I feel like that's a real practice of awareness. Like that comes from an embodied non-dual spiritual practice that we can then kind of have that level of awareness around what we're doing, and then nothing gets demonized and we're able to dance with all of these different aspects of ourselves.
100%. I mean, there's so much in what you just said. God, I'm thinking to even go back to what you said about feeling this for my ancestors who didn't get to feel it. Like that one just went straight to my heart, because I feel like so many things that I am experiencing and living in my life are ways that my ancestors did not get to live. They just did not. 100%. I feel so sure of it. More liberated and less codependent styles of like relationship, or my sexual expression and identity. Oh my God. I could just scream just thinking about it. The oppression and the trauma that I feel has moved through the people who have laid their bodies down for me to get to this place. It's like when I ever slightly slink into the feeling of, oh, you know, like I shouldn't be doing this, or I don't deserve to experience this pleasure right now, or shame in actually fully owning whatever beauty and liveness that I want to own. It's like, think of all the people who have laid their bodies down for me to get to this place. It's like, it's my duty to do that for them if it is available. And if it feels right to me in the moment, it's like, I get to free the people who have come before me in my freedom. They get to taste this. I definitely have been granted more freedom in my lifetime than anyone has experienced in my ancestry for a very long time. I feel. So yeah, that really speaks to me very deeply and calls me to step in and feel deeply and and also celebrate joy and celebrate liberation, and by celebrating it, call more of it in and share it, to share it as much as possible with as many people as I can. Yeah, gosh, that one feels really deep.
You mentioned your journey with your sexuality, and in your biography, it's like one of the first words is queer. You know, it really feels like it's something that you've been on a big journey with, and that you're really owning as part of who you are and what you offer into the world. Can you share a bit more about that journey for us?
Yeah, I have definitely experienced a lot of shame around sex and sexual identity, which I do feel is kind of, yeah, also something that I've kind of inherited from my kind of lineage and my family in certain ways. But yeah, in terms of being queer, I always felt like it was kind of, I mean, it is really, it's kind of, it's always been presented as something which is very outside of the norm. And I still don't feel like I feel the same amount of like relationship privilege necessarily being in a same-sex relationship as straight couples do. But I use the word queer to speak to my sexuality, because it feels like a bit of a rebellious statement for me of not wanting to have to define in any more detail for people, and allowing my sexuality to morph and be what it wants to be on any different day. I feel very attracted to people of all different genders. Yeah, and then just enjoy exploring people rather than necessarily their genders so much. Really, I don't know. I'm thinking about the younger generation now, and how when I was 16, it felt like a huge thing. When I realized that I was really attracted to women, I felt like I needed to come out. It felt like a really big thing at the time, that I need to define myself. I need to come out as gay, and I need to tell everyone that this is what it is. And I'm realizing now, as I'm speaking so I do a lot of youth work, I just listen to a lot of like people talking about queerness and sexuality. And I'm realizing now that it's kind of, I think coming out is something that we're culturally moving past, because even that idea of coming out assumes that we live in this kind of heteronormative world in the first place, where if you're anything outside of the normal, aka straight, then you need to state that, because you're veering in a different direction than whatever the norm is. Whereas I'm hoping that young people nowadays, and the generation of people who are maybe like, I don't know, coming out in their, well, not even coming out, I've just done it again, but like in their teens or kind of discovering sexuality, I hope that people don't necessarily feel the need to come out as one thing or another, or, you know, put themselves in a box in order to feel worthy. At that time, I felt like I needed to find a box for myself. I felt so deeply rejected by men and boys at the time, which I think was also a very racialized experience for me, being a young, Black, little bit like fat, little hairy teenager. I felt so outside of everything that was attractive. I was just like, let me just hide, really. And I felt very strongly and painfully rejected by the male gaze. Even though I do feel very deep attraction to women, always have do, and still do, I feel like my need to feel like, right, well, I'm definitely a lesbian then was partly due to the trauma of feeling so othered by men in that situation for me. All right. And just speaking specifically for me, like no one else who might come out as gay or a lesbian. But what I realized as I kind of moved through life and kind of experienced more is that I don't really define myself strictly as a lesbian. And I do find myself attracted to men and, non-binary people, trans people. And I don't feel like I need to necessarily box it into that one place. For me, experiencing love in many different ways, even like experiencing love in an open relationship, is something which has been like a huge like spiritual journey and path for me, I really want to continue to lean into that and to continue to know people intimately. It feels very important to me.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I find it so fascinating how, I mean, I suppose it happens with every generation. Like when I remember being a teenager and you see people 15, 20 years older and you just think, why do they think like that? Why have they constructed the world that way? And I find it incredible talking to young people now, and there's so much freedom and fluidity around gender, and also so much like deep care for the planet in this really obvious way. And it makes me feel very inspired about what may be to come. And even that doom perspective is also an aspect of an older, less open perspective, because there is a doom that's coming, but it's the world as we know it that's going to end, and we don't know what that's going to look like. And I feel like keeping that space open for what might emerge is so much what it is to be a human.
Space open for what might emerge. Gosh, I really want to open that space up. In the youth work that I do, often to like call people together. Sometimes it's with like 17, 18-year-olds, and sometimes it's with like more like younger, like 14, 16-year-olds. And, you know, sometimes we call them the young people. And sometimes I actually just like to call them like future ancestors instead, or future elders. You know, if I'm like calling everyone together, I'm like, future elders, you know, like just, it brings this sense of like, well, this planet is yours. What is your lineage going to be? Like, what is your legacy going to be? Yeah, bringing that awareness that this is your future to the young people that I work with. I really like doing that. And I also like kind of masquerading as part of them, because I still feel very young. I mean, I just turned 30. Well, I turned 30 like 3 days after my brother died. So it's been a kind of interesting initiation this year so far, but I still feel very much like a young person. So enjoy being in their space.
Oh, Ava, it has been incredible to spend this time with you. Thank you for sharing with us. And I'm really excited about going on this embodiment journey with you through From Me to We, which starts on Monday. So please, if you're listening, come and get involved. Bring your body, bring your soul, bring yourself to this journey, to this inquiry that we are going on together, that I really feel speaks to this time. And so anyone that sees themselves as on a spiritual path and as an activist, come and get involved. We really want to make it open to anyone that feels that call. So there's so many different options of how you can join in, and scholarships and all of that jazz. So yeah, come be part of it. Ava, what is your call to action that you want to leave us with?
I would say to start from uniquely where we are individually, to not be afraid to feel the challenging things that you have within you, and to not be afraid to encounter the pain that you might be experiencing, and knowing that encountering that will open up more insight, truth, love, joy in our lives.
Beautiful. How would you like everyone to connect with you after this conversation? Of course, come on From Me to We. And you have your own podcast, and you have many other offerings. Can you share your website and how we can get in touch?
Absolutely. So you can follow me on Instagram at Ava Zara, and also my kind of still collective project of the Creative Soul Collective is a space for podcast and blog that centers around creativity, culture, and spirituality. And it's kind of undergoing a little bit of a rebrand as well, but you can find that at thecreativesoulcollective.com. And please also check out the Empowerment project at empower.org, and the conscious activism training that we're going to be running twice in the autumn of this year. That's also going to be online, and it's developing, and there's a really rich offering. So I would love to meet people there as well.
Amazing. Can you just share a little bit about what the Empowerment Project is? Yeah, I've been really inspired by, and Jessica Green, who's part of it, her and I used to come together and do these events under the name of 108 London. And then as that moved on, Julia Midland then was in London, and Jess met Julia, and then Empowerment came into being, and it's just so much incredible work that's happening through that organization. So please just share a little bit.
Yeah, I would really love to. So the Empowerment Project started as an organization, a not-for-profit, that was strictly focused around offering trauma-sensitive healing practices to refugees and asylum seekers, and has kind of expanded to offering the same kinds of trauma-informed healing practices to people from marginalised communities in general, and as well as offering that work to communities specifically. We also work with a lot of facilitators who work with those communities in order to educate and to teach about trauma-informed healing practices, trauma-informed yoga, language, and social justice frameworks that help in aid work or any facilitation that's going to be done with different communities experiencing trauma. Yeah, so it's basically for anyone who wants to lean further into spiritual practice, very much in the kind of way that we're doing with All That We Are, which is kind of is socially informed. It's informed by social justice. Yeah, to be informed for facilitation work with communities, basically.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening and spending your time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. For less than a tea or coffee a day, you can access our community conversations and benefits such as our app and member gatherings, as well as being a patron whose support makes this podcast happen. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others find us. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.